Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. Striking down Section 497 of the Indian Penal Code, which provides for punishment only to a man for having extramarital sexual ties with the wife of another man, will destroy the institution of marriage, the centre told the Supreme Court on Wednesday. In an affidavit to the Supreme Court, the Ministry of Home Affairs sought dismissal of a plea challenging the validity of the penal law on adultery, saying that the Section 497 supports, safeguards and protects the institution of marriage. The top court had referred the PIL challenging the constitutional validity of the adultery law to the Constitution bench in January this year. The PIL had been filed by one Joseph Shine, an expatriate Indian living in Italy. The apex court had earlier sought the centre's stand on the PIL, which pointed out that only men can be punished for the offence of adultery for having consensual sex with the wife of another man. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a closer look at Section 497 of the Indian Penal Code. Joining me on the program today are J. Sai Deepak, Advocate of the Supreme Court, Suvidat Sundaram, Advocate of the Petitioner, Geeta Luthra, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court, and Rahul Ishwar, author and activist. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Sai Deepak, I'd like to begin with you. Let's first try and put into perspective and see what 497 or Section 497 of the Indian Penal Code states. And is it unconstitutional since it violates Article 14, 15 and 21 of the Indian Constitution as claimed by the petitioner?
Since this is a question of interpretation of the provision itself, in fact, it would help to actually read out the provision because it has quite a few implications which are unintendedly funny according to me. Section 497 reads as follows: whoever has sexual intercourse with a person, so it starts with whoever, and it says with a person, there is no general specific reference there, who is and whom he knows, that is where the first time it becomes he, or has reason to believe to be the wife of another man, without the consent or connivance of that man, such sexual intercourse not amounting to the offence of rape is guilty of the offence of adultery and shall be punished, so on and so forth. Then it says, in such case, the wife shall not be punishable as an abettor. There is a clear clarification there. Now, here's the problem. Now, the General Clauses Act specifically says that wherever there is a reference to he, it shall be construed as she as well. So, it is only with respect to this provision that he is only a he and not a she. 2, it says that if you have a sexual intercourse with the wife of another man without the consent or connivance of that man, then it shall amount to adultery. And therefore, that is when the marriage system effectively breaks down. So if it happens with the consent or connivance of the other man, what happens to the marital system then? We are not sure of it. Therefore, these are certain questions which a few committees themselves have raised. The first judgment in which the validity of this particular provision was upheld was in 1954 of Yusuf Abdul Aziz versus State of Bombay, wherein the Supreme Court effectively cited Article 15(3) as the basis for justifying this special provision and its specific orientation in terms of protecting the woman as a victim. Now, what is also important to understand is, assume that if it were to be a woman who has a sexual intercourse with a woman who is already married, then what happens? Does the provision apply? What happens if, let's say, a married woman has two sexual orientations?
I guess that's why the Supreme Court is also looking at 377 at the moment, even as we speak.
As far as I'm concerned, both these petitions must be tagged together. Because if let's assume for a moment that a married woman is a bisexual and she has a relationship with another woman, then does the provision apply? Is it not adultery then, or does it not affect the marriage then? So, as far as I'm concerned, there is a serious question of gender equality which is to be raised. In fact, there have been recommendations which go to the effect of saying, in fact, the National Commission for Women in 2006 wanted this provision or this adultery to be decriminalized, and in a host of advanced civilized jurisdictions it is decriminalized. Most importantly, the court has recognized the sanctity and privacy of a marital relationship, in which case the question that you must ask yourself is, how is the state party to a marriage? What is the state's role?
Right.
An offense has to have a statist character in some sense, wherein the state has a role. Now, this is a consensual relationship which doesn't amount to rape. In such a situation, what is the role of a state? It's not as if you're branding this a sexual offense, it's a marital offense, which stands distinguished from a sexual offense. So at multiple levels, I think this provision militates Article 14, 15, 21 and whatnot. According to me, reducing the woman to the status of a victim and to the husband's property where his consent is needed is actually patriarchal. I think in the 42nd report, Law Commission report, I think in which the Indian Penal Code's draft was initially shared, this provision was actually absent.
Sure.
It was subsequently introduced.
Sure.
So as far as I'm concerned, in today's day and age, I think this provision is anachronistic, outdated, archaic, and certainly patriarchal.
Okay, all right. Let me get in Geeta Luthra, now senior advocate of the Supreme Court as well, to weigh in on the debate. How will striking down Article or Section 497 destroy the institution of marriage?
It obviously doesn't destroy the institution of marriage. I think it's completely absurd, and it's very unfortunate that the state with all its might has thought that this is the kind of counter that it will file. See, one is marital adultery, which is a marital offense which entitles a person to a divorce. This is available to both men and women. For adultery with anyone, whether it be a married person with whom they are having an extramarital relationship or a single person. That makes sense in today's day and time. If somebody is not being loyal in marriage and you feel that this is a marital misdemeanor, then you should be entitled to divorce on that ground. We can understand that. But to say that this will destroy the sanctity of marriage is really begging the issue. It doesn't destroy the sanctity of marriage if you have an affair with a single woman. It doesn't destroy the sanctity of marriage if there is connivance of the man. If the man says, yes, go ahead and have sex with my wife, he says, okay, this is my chattel, this belongs to me, do what you like, you can take it away, and then it's not an offense. This is completely, as Speaker Deepak said, it's archaic. It's absolutely not in keeping with today's criminal jurisprudence, where women are obviously not to be treated as chattels. So very clearly, this is not saving or destroying a marriage one way or the other. It's just a provision which can be used to beat your spouse, because through their friend who they may be having an affair with, you can use it to bring in criminality. Criminality has no place in this kind of position. Now, one aspect which was said by Deepak is that they're in marital personal sphere where there is privacy, there can be no criminality. There can be criminality in certain aspects, because there is criminality, for example, in 498A, there's criminality in dowry deaths, there is criminality. But this adultery is not a criminality, and not when you treat a person just as a belonging and not as a human being.
Okay.
So I feel, and the other aspect about attack on Article 14, 15 and 16, see, all laws, all criminal laws are not gender neutral. There will be gender neutral laws and there will be gender specific laws. There are as many as, I think, about 42 or 46 enactments at least, which are specifically meant for the benefit of women. Those don't attack or those don't infringe on Article 15 or 14.
Sure.
In fact, making a positive discrimination or positive enactment for a weaker sex or a weaker community or a weaker caste has been recognized by our constitution.
Right.
We
Points
have
taken.
reservation for this reason. So
points taken.
We can't say
Geeta Luthra,
that
thank you for putting that into perspective for us and talking about how there are gender-specific laws as well, and those laws, of course, do not impinge on Article 14, 15, 16 and 21 as well. Let me bring in Suvidat Sundaram now into the picture. You represent the petitioner, of course. Why should the penal clause be removed from Section 497 of the IPC? What is it that you've been saying?
So, in fact, when the petitioner approached me, the main reason he was giving, as well as it was having a same wavelength of mind, recently we all know that this right to privacy has declared to be a fundamental right. Okay, right to privacy includes sexual privacy also. So that means if someone is indulging in a sexual intercourse, that too with full consent, okay, why should state intervene in that? Why should state intervene and penalize someone? And the most interesting part, I mean, so far as this adultery's provision is concerned, here only, the state only punishes one person. That means the wife who has indulged in the sexual intercourse with the outsider, she is exempted. That means gender neutrality is not there. At least in criminal law, so far as this provision is concerned, gender neutral, I mean, the provision should be gender neutral, but that's not the case here. The wife is exempted. And another interesting fact is, only the husband can, come with a grievance. That means he is, felt cheated, and that's why, he approaches this authorities. Not anyone. Because Section 198, Clause 2 of CRPC specifically states that.
So only the husband, the aggrieved husband, can come out and make a complaint, and only then will any action be taken. Is what you're suggesting.
That too when she should also be held liable. She is an abettor, in fact, in this crime.
Right.
But she is exempted.
Right. Okay. I want to focus on one aspect. An aspect that you raised, Sai Deepak, and everybody else also contributed to. Why should the state be a party to any of this? Insider, outsider, like Suvidat was talking about, that's the personal matter of 2 people, 3 people, 4 people.
Correct.
It should be dealt with by themselves. Why should the state get involved? Why should the executive get involved? Should it not think or concentrate on more important things?
Right. See, in fact, it's a fantastic question. Here's the funny part. The state has a role to play when there is an element of consent that is missing in a certain transaction or in a certain interaction, which results in physical harm of some sort or reputational harm of some sort. In this case, there is a man A, there is a woman B, there is another man C. Whether the marriage is to be treated as a contract or a sacrament, depending on the personal laws under which the marriage takes place, either case, there is no disputing the fact that it is the husband and the wife who owe an obligation to each other. The third party does not owe an obligation to either of them. But who is punished in this particular issue? It's the third party, but not someone who is actually obligated to the other spouse as far as the marriage is concerned. That makes no sense at all. So you're asking the rest of the world to respect the sanctity of this marriage and to not interfere with this particular marriage. So I think this is where the state is actually playing a role which goes beyond its mandate, according to me. Second, on the aspect of equality and gender-specific laws, there is no doubting the fact that wherever there exists a problem or a discrimination, Article 15(3) is specifically used to come out with a remedial mechanism to right that particular wrong and to set the balance right, to ensure that people have a level playing field and equality is actually created in a real sense. However, to create a specific right in favor of the wife in a certain marriage, wherein she shall not be punished when it comes to having relationships with the third party, and it shall be the third party who shall be punished, and the same provision or the same right is not available to the husband as well, creates a sense of inequality as far as I am concerned. 3, as ma'am rightly put, if there is a problem in the marriage and it has come to a situation where they have irreconcilable differences, the option is to walk out of the marriage.
Yeah.
Okay. You have civil remedies available. This is not a case where it's a case of domestic violence of sorts. Okay. Or you can use this particular aspect of an extramarital relationship as a ground of cruelty and walk out of the marriage if you wish to. But what is this retributory kind of handle that is being given? And that too to the husband against the third man. Effectively, it is 2 men fighting over a woman, which the state is actually facilitating, and you objectify the woman as far as that particular equation is concerned. In my opinion, this is representative of a clear Victorian mindset which has no business as far as India is concerned.
But
we don't subscribe to it.
Walking out of the marriage also in these days is considered to be very Western. So is it against Indian ethos?
As far as I am concerned, to say that a marriage is a relationship without an exit option would be wrong for the simple reason that perhaps divorce was not an option in the previous generation. But as society has changed, it has become a certain option. Why suffer in silence for the rest of your life when you could perhaps choose happiness or peace outside of the marriage?
Sure.
So I think everybody's entitled to take the decision.
Sure. Rahul Ishwar, let me bring you into the picture now. Finally, we've got that line going as far as you are concerned. Are Indian ethos endangered by adultery?
Indian ethos are extremely important, and marriage, we believe, has some kind of sanctity that should be upheld. That Indian ethos should be upheld not only by our culture, but also by inculcating many things like premarital education.
As far as this particular issue is concerned, Geeta Luthra, what's the way forward? How do we deal with this particular issue of Section 497?
So I think the only way to deal with it is to strike it down. It's archaic. It's absolutely treating a person as if they belong to another person, a woman as if they belong to their husband. So it's saying, this is my sofa and so I can lend it to you. This is my wife and I can lend her to you. Otherwise, you'll be guilty of theft. So this is a kind of theft. Obviously, such a law has no place. And there have been committee after committee of criminal reforms, including Malimat Committee, which have said this law is bad. But they don't just say this law is bad. In fact, what they say is something which I think is even more absurd, that you make it available both to men and women, so that both would be criminally punished. In fact, that itself is also archaic, but in another way. So what you want to in fact say, or what I would say is, the law is bad, strike it down. No one should be punished for adultery. It should not be a criminal offense. It is already a civil matrimonial offense in most enactments for most religions and most communities, and that's what it should remain.
Sure.
If you have a grievance against your spouse and they are in adultery, you go to a court and end the marriage. But you can't be going to a criminal court. Criminal law has no place, and adultery as a criminal enactment, particularly in the warped manner in which our criminal adultery is absolutely, it's an 1860
Indeed.
Penal code.
It is.
So you must remember that we moved with the times.
It is
now,
more than 157 years old. It is a
belief?
British era law that we are implementing even in 2018, and that's the problem really, is what Geeta Luthra is suggesting. Let me go back to Rahul Ishwar now. He's rejoined us on the program. Go ahead, Rahul, make the point that you are making.
Can I just add two quick points? One, even states like Colorado in the United States of America has something called premarital education before they go into marriage. I believe in Indian culture and I believe in our Sanskriti. And along with that, we need marital education, just like our Christian organization and all the Christian sabhas do. What happens after marriage and going to courts, adultery are all later. But this kind of sensitization, orientation and education is important. Justice Kirubagaran of the Madras High Court and even in the Justice Arjit Pasayat verdict regarding marriage, there are provisions in which the different governments can co-opt these kind of marital education to be made mandatory. See, marriage is a lifelong institution and we Indians believe it has some kind of a sanctity and sacredness. That sanctity should be protected in the name of being progressive, in the name of modernity, saying that family is an outdated system, marriage is an outdated system, marriage is all sham, marriage is not good, is an unfortunate wrong approach. Monogamous marriage is the most successful institution in the history of mankind. It is that institution which helped great civilization and societies form in the particular way they have been formed. So there is an ethical responsibility in the part of government also to uphold the institution of marriage. Yes, there can be a debate how much it can be applicable to the criminal arena, how much to the civil arena. More important is that some kind of premarital education, just like our Christian organizations or churches are doing, should be made mandatory to all communities. And I hope government will take such kind of steps which will in effect protect the marriage system and the family system of our nation.
Okay, it shouldn't just be done by the church, it should be done by the government also, is what Rahul Ishwar is suggesting as far as premarital courses are concerned, to see how a married couple, a newly married couple can go ahead and keep their marriage sanctity intact, you know. Okay, yes, Sai Deepak, very quickly before I go across to
On the question
Suvita.
of Indian ethos, the one thing that we must all remember is when Draupadi was actually staked at the game of dice by Yudhishthira, the one question she goes about asking is, am I chattel for me to be actually staked as property in a game of dice? And that question was loud and clear as far as that chapter of the Mahabharata is concerned. Therefore, as far as I am concerned, by striking down this particular provision, we would actually be consistent with Indian ethos. Point number two, I don't think decriminalizing adultery gives a clean sheet to an adulterous marriage or a marriage without any kind of morals. This is not the same as saying that if you do not have this particular provision, then the institution of marriage itself will fall. If that is how strong or weak the institution of marriage is, then it's for you to judge whether or not that's supposed to be there in the first place. But as far as I am concerned, the institution of marriage is not upheld by this one pillar of decriminalizing or criminalizing adultery.
Suvita, do we need a law to govern adultery, and how successful has Section 497 been?
See, in fact, so far as our petition is concerned, we are going for a blatant striking down of this provision. There is no room for such provision in this evolving times of, global jurisprudence, when so many countries in Western world, even in African countries, they are striking down this provision. They are decriminalizing the provision of adultery. Then why then, India? Why not India? And we are boasting that, okay, we are in fact, pushing towards a very developed and, so-called, developed world. I think it's it's high time that, we strike down this provision altogether. I'm not only sticking to the general neutral that, okay, women also should be punished. No, that is one side of the argument. The prime, ground, the prime prayer that we are raised before the Supreme Court is to strike down this provision, to do away with this provision from our penal books.
All right. Time now to get closing comments from all my guests on the way forward, really, and what should be done as far as this issue is concerned, starting first with Geeta Luthra.
So I think the counter affidavit of the union desires much and leaves much, which is not what we would have thought the union will give. The sanctity of marriage definitely doesn't depend on 497, and the sooner we strike it down, the better it is.
Rahul Ishwar.
Just one point. We need laws which are gender sensitive. Gender neutral as a term may appear very nice, but gender sensitive is what we need. And all the modern scientific studies suggest men are women are unique, and they are, as the metaphoric way says, they are from Mars and Venus. So we need gender sensitive laws rather than gender neutral laws.
Suvidat?
I totally agree with Rahul Ishwar. He makes sense in that aspect. See, but my point is, even the union's affidavit, it says that, the closing paras states that let the law commission, in fact, they have already constituted working committees, and let them, come with the recommendations. I'm waiting for that. But before that, definitely Supreme Court would, have a final say.
Indeed, the Supreme Court will have a final say. Sai Deepak, do we need to go back to 2003, go back to the Malimat Committee report probably, and look at what the committee has said about 497 and gender-neutral laws on the whole?
See, if the provision is accepted as being an absurd one, the Malimat Committee says that you might as well make it equally absurd to both genders, which I don't think is the way to go forward. As far as I'm concerned, accept the absurdity of the provision and act upon it, thereby strike it down in completion, completely, without actually saying that I will now make sure that both parties have the sword to fight with each other, or to say that let's tone it down a bit by reducing the quantum of punishment, which is also one of the suggestions of the Malimat Committee. I don't think that's the way to go about it. Ensure that you strike it down, and ensure that if you really want to protect the institution of marriage, I don't think criminalizing or holding a stick or wielding a stick of this sort is the best way to go about it. As the one thing that I'd certainly agree with Rahul Ishwar is that you have gender-sensitive laws, and see if there are other remedies that you can provide under divorce laws or other forms of legislations that address marriage as a whole. But criminalizing it is certainly not the way to go forward.
All right. On that note, then we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.